Folks, let me call the meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled Greer City Council meeting called and convened this evening, April 27th, 2021. Having called the meeting to order, I'd like to ask Council Member Judy Albert if she would please to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation for council. Council and Public Forum this evening, we have two members that participants that would like to take advantage of the public forum. As we do, we offer this time for items relevant to the agenda or meeting. We'll invite these folks to come to the podium. Mr. Brian Martin has signed up first. Mr. Martin, the podium is yours, sir. If you will, please give your name and address as a matter of record. We would appreciate it, and we will entertain your information, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. My name is Brian Martin. My address is 3 Meadowbreeze Court in the city of Greer, South Carolina. Here before you tonight with regard to ordinance number 22-2021, which is a rezoning request for a parcel located at 504 West Poinsett Street in Greer. This is a piece that is behind the H&R Block State Farm Building on the corner of Memorial Drive and West Poinsett Street. And then the coming back towards town in that block, you have the H&R Block Building, this lot, a residential home, and then a commercial property that was purchased by Mr. and Mrs. Morelli and has recently been renovated for a real estate office. The owner of 504 West Poinsett Wood Farm LP has been trying to sell that property for some time, but the property has some limitations because of its width. It's only about 40 feet wide. And the Department of Transportation, it's currently zoned residential, but it's too narrow for the residential contractors that we've talked with to really be a viable residential, plus being on West Poinsett Street. In talking with DOT about getting a commercial cut, they were not in favor of putting a commercial cut in there because of its proximity to Memorial Drive. And so we worked out an arrangement between the seller, Wood Farm LP, the Morellis, who own 500 West Poinsett, and I think it's 102 Memorial LLC that owns the property adjacent to the H&R Block State Farm fronting on Memorial Drive. And in working with them and with the DOT has approved a one-way entrance into this lot off of Poinsett for it to be as a parking lot, which would be used by and owned by the Morellis, who own 500 West Poinsett Street. And they need more parking for their business and the use of the business in that property to assist them in being able to gain the full usage of their property in compliance with the city's guidelines for parking. The owner of 102 Memorial has agreed to an easement to allow the one-way entrance off of West Poinsett and a one-way exit onto Memorial Drive with the use of the parking as well. So found a situation to use a piece of property that is sitting there and been vacant for quite some time to the benefit of selling it for the seller, more utility for the owner of 500 West Poinsett and their property, and more utility for the owner of 102 Memorial Drive. And they're all in agreement to do this, and it's here just to make sure it was a very complicated arrangement to work out, and wanted to be sure that you understood what was going on in the request to change this from residential to C2. That's all I have.
Will you be staying later in the meeting?
I will.
More questions come up?
I will be here if any questions come up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Ponder, you're next, sir. You'll state your name and address for a matter of record, please, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Kenneth Darrell Ponder. I live at 1613 Old Highway 14 South, Greer, South Carolina, and I've lived there approximately 30 years. And I'm in opposition to Ordinance 18-2021 and 19-2021, and I have brought a petition with me. The last petition I brought on April the 13th was 55. The petition I bring in today is 174. It's the majority of South Buncombe Road, Suber Road, from 14 up to up to South Buncombe, Old Highway 14 South, Farmers Circle, Smith Drive, also parts of Bessie, parts of Bobby, parts of Buddy, Pleasant Drive itself, Anna Rose Court. This includes citizens of Greer and people who live outside of Greer both. They all join together and they don't want this in the neighborhood because they have enough. The infrastructure of the roads are not supporting this. It's just not, it's not feasible for it to continue like this. And to bring in more truck traffic is ridiculous. But the biggest problem is they want to take the property, rezone it, and store tractor trailers in between our houses. Now, Jack Rogers and his wife Janet live on one side of it, and Ray Berry and his wife Melody live behind Jack Rogers, and that's next to Nifty Lift. Then up above that there's me and Steve Mullinax, and there's also a Kevin Anderson and a Rita Anderson that live on the back side that face Nifty Lift. Now they're going to be facing, if it gets rezoned, they're going to be facing Nifty Lift behind them and STI, and eventually Van Swafford, who bought Dr. Peoples' property, would be putting in something else there in front of theirs because this is on S1 right there, so they have it in their front yard at the same time. It's really just too much for their area, but nobody in the area wants it. And like I said, this includes Greer citizens and people who live outside of Greer, and some of these people have lived there 2 to 5 generations. And I oppose it, and I'm representing 173 people. I'm one of them. That makes 174. And the 2 pieces of property, well, it's a 100% petition to annex and rezone, but you're basically talking about 2 people. That's their petition, 100%. That's the way it works. But 174 people. And I could give you more if I had more time to get it, because they're willing not to go there, not to put it in. You got Southern Commerce on Poplar Drive, STI on South Buncombe Road, Kimberly Clark on Suber Road, and Swafford Trucking on Old Highway 14 South. It's killing the neighborhood. I mean, I understand there's a comprehensive plan, and I understand what it says, but does the comprehensive plan say anything about the residents who already live there and have lived there for a long time? Because when you do this, you're making it hard on them. And some of these people they want their children to live beside them, and they're thinking now about not doing it. It's like you're actually asking them in a roundabout way, y'all need to get out so we can go commercial. Some of these people don't want to move. I don't. Matter of fact, I'm not. And that's about all I got to say, unless y'all got any questions you want to ask me.
Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, before we move on, I think somebody's dropped their wallet or a phone that's laying over here on the floor, so you may want to check your pockets just before you run out. Right.
No money in it.
Thank you, sir. move to the minutes of the council meeting from April 13th, 2021. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for any discussion in that regard. Any items of note for the clerk? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert. Yes. Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we were going to take an opportunity to recognize someone this evening, and Mr. Arrowwood asked to be a part of that. He's unable to join us this evening, so we will reschedule that to a later date. You have departmental reports contained in your packet this evening. We have Ms. Susan Howell with us to give us our financial report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just like to give you a brief overview of the general fund as of March 31st, 2021. Starting out with revenue, $2.2 million was collected in March for a year-to-date total revenue of $23,960,000. Operational expenditures in March were $2 million and a small fund balance usage of $3,500 to give us a year-to-date total expenditures of $20.8 million, which is 5% under budget. If you refer to your dashboards where we compare actual to benchmarks, we have a positive variance of $3,038,000. And in the general fund cash balance as of March 31st, we have $17,057,000. That's the brief overview, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Council, questions? Comments? We appreciate you today. Well, it's time for our annual review of the City of Greer fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020 audit. David Seifert, our Chief Financial Officer, comes this evening to introduce the folks from Green Finley that will be here tonight to go over it, and we appreciate you being involved in this process. I know that this is always a long and thorough process, and we appreciate it being done and handled in the way that it is. And seems like with the changes that come our way every year, it's something a little bit different every year. But we thank you for the effort that you put into that, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And as you mentioned, I am here to introduce David Phillips, who is one of the partners and the partner in charge of the audit from Green Finley LLP. You notice that it is not a misprint. It is June 30th, 2020. As we're all aware, the COVID pandemic hit in March and really kind of shut everybody down, and we were no exception. So it postponed the audit and moved it backwards. And once we opened back up, we had to work with the auditors to get everything rescheduled. And all the governments that had a June 30th year end were in that mad rush. So, talking to David, they are there, almost every night going to a different council meeting presenting the audit. But I won't belabor that anymore. We'll just introduce David, and he will present the results from June 30th of 2020.
All right, I know this is pretty old news, like he mentioned to you. We could go through this report he sent you, but I think that'd put everybody to sleep, so we won't do that, of course. But we will try to hit the highlights. We've tried to put together a PowerPoint that kind of hits the main revenue, fund balance, and so forth. But as we go through it, if you have any questions, please feel free to interject, or if you want to wait to the end, that is fine as well. All right, we like to remind everybody, that these financial statements are the city's. David and his staff put it together. We're there to audit it. And so our responsibility here on the next slide is to issue an opinion. And remember, we don't give you absolute assurance. We give you reasonable assurance, because the only way we could give you absolute assurance is if we looked at every single transaction. But we use materiality, we use sampling, and we look at populations of transactions and we take a sample, and if we see that transactions in that population are being recorded appropriately, then we can statistically extrapolate that to the remaining population. Again, you got on the last bullet point there an unmodified opinion. That's actually a good term. If we modified it, we would say everything looks good except for this. And you really don't want one of those. All right, well, let's look at your fund balance. Now, remember, we're stepping back to June 30th of 2020. What you just heard is a lot more recent salient information. But again, your fund balance was about $15.6 million. It decreased, and if you remember, y'all had been saving up for a lot of projects for a lot of years. Well, a lot of those projects started coming due, and you began to work on the parking and the streetscape, and a lot of those funds were being used for that. So that's why the fund balance there decreased. There's various categories of fund balance. One category is called non-spendable, and it includes about $1.5 million for prepaids. And you already prepaid on a big ladder truck. But a lot of times the fire trucks, especially in the pandemic, were getting really delayed because they just couldn't deliver them. They couldn't build them fast enough. And so there's been a huge time lag on some of those trucks. And we've seen that kind of across the board. Also, you assigned about $608,000 in your 2021 budget for various ongoing costs in that budget. So then we come over to a category called unassigned, which means there's no constraints on it. It's available. And that bucket is $13.5 million. It was $18 million in the prior year, but we just talked about, you had saved up. And so you began to spend it, you began to transfer it to your capital projects funds and so forth to start on the parking and on the streetscape and so forth. And so that is about 58% of your 2020 actual expenditures. And the GFOA, which stands for the Government Finance Officers Association, they're kind of like the Bible of governments. They recommend a minimum of 2 months. And so if you can see, you're well ahead of that. But you can also see in the chart where you had built it up and it's come down a little bit because of the projects that began to take place. All right, so again, why do you want to have a strong fund balance? Well, we've listed a lot of these topics for years. Some revenues are cyclical. They only come in at certain times. But the big one that's really hit home to a lot of people this year is that last bullet point. We had a lot of governments that thought, well, we're only going to keep 1 month. That's all we're going to ever keep. Well, when the health pandemic hit, that didn't go so well. And I think a lot of people have a renewed understanding or appreciation for maintaining a strong fund balance because it allows you to weather storms until the economy maybe picks up and so forth. All right, so let's look at your revenues. Your revenues were a total of $29 million. We kind of list the biggest buckets. Of course, a little over 50% is in property taxes. But then you have a lot in franchises and licenses. Those are really growth-oriented, a lot of times, revenues. And so if the economy is going really well, those revenues continue to grow, or they go down a little bit if it isn't growing as well. You had $1.9 million in permits, and then you see those other categories. You still had a $1.8 million increase over the prior year, even with 3 months of pandemic. So you really still had very strong revenues. Your property taxes kept coming in extremely strong, and that was the largest piece of that. As it relates to budget, you came in over budget on your revenues by about $2.7 million, or 10%, and a lot of that was in property taxes, but also in franchises, because the growth in businesses and so forth. And your staff, they don't just assume that you collected it last year. We're going to take that number and multiply it by 1.05, 5 more percent. They always kind of discount, say, oh, we want to protect ourselves just in case there is a pullback. And so therefore, that's another reason why you came in so strong over budget. Let's look at your expenditures. They were $23.1 million. We kind of list the various functions, but what we normally see is that public safety, again, police and fire, it generally runs around 40 to 60% for most of our governments. And then you see the other categories. There was an increase of about $1.3 million, or 6% over the prior year. And the biggest reason, if you look at that last bullet point, remember, pretty much your budget, your operating costs are salary and benefits. So if you give a 2.4 COLA, if you give a 2.2 average step, and there's some benefit costs, PIBA, all those health costs keep going up every year, that is the driver for your expense increase. All right, you came in, this is I think one of the most important pieces, under budget by about 1.6. So for me as a council member, if I approved a budget, I want my staff to carry out that budget and be under that budget unless they come to us, to you, and ask for you to amend it. And so you can see that you came in significantly below budget, and so they really adhered, and there were savings that were generated over the last year. There were also a lot of transfers to fund projects, and so we kind of list a lot of those down there in that area, but the biggest part are the downtown construction projects, a transfer out to the 2017 IPRB fund of about $7.7 million. Again, that's to work on those projects. And you remember, you're issuing some debt too to help on certain things, or in prior years. All that money's coming to bear to work on those projects. All right, let's look at some of your other funds. Your hospitality tax fund had approximately $1.7 million in fund balance. Remember, those revenues, those fund balance can only be used for tourism-related type of cost. Can't just be used for anything. So you had revenues of about 2.5 and also expenditures of that, and we just kind of listed what some of those costs were for. As it relates to your stormwater fund, you had approximately $1.4 million in fund balance. You had revenues of 1.1, some expenditures there, but then you also transferred out to cover some costs, operating costs, and other costs for the projects as well. All right, your real property fund had approximately $3.2 million in fund balance, all of which is assigned for capital projects. You had a little bit of revenue coming in from the hospital sales settlement, some transfers in, but then you had expenditures for a lot of capital outlay related to the Kids Planet, some purchases of property, and some other construction and renovation projects. I know it gets hard because we're talking about a lot of different funds. All of them sometimes are contributing some monies to these projects, so sometimes it's hard to keep track. And that's why it's good to have a staff who's doing that and keeping track of all these funds. Your road paving fund had approximately $588,000 in fund balance. And again, those monies are really using for paving and sidewalk projects and so forth. All right, the 2017 IPRB fund had approximately $4.4 million in fund balance. You had these big transfers in that we talked about. And this is where you see the construction really taking place on the parking facility, on the streetscape. This is the main fund that's capturing all those costs. All right, want to briefly mention to you pension accounting. The state pension plan, which pretty much all governments participate, your employees are all members of that. That plan is way, way, way underfunded. And the GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, a number of years ago said, you know what, if you participate in one of these plans, and those plans are underfunded, we want you to record your proportionate share of the liability on your books so that you can kind of get a feel for what your ultimate obligation might be. And so how that works is that you make contributions to the PIBA every year. And the way it gets allocated is they take your contributions to the PIBA as a percentage of all contributions to the PIBA from all the governments, and maybe that's 0.0001%. You get that 0.001% of the 20-some billion dollar liability. That's kind of how it works. So your portion there is about $21.7 million. It increased 1.2, and if your payroll is growing, guess what? Your percentage of the liability will grow. Unfortunately, that's how it works. The real takeaway is the third to the last bullet point. Because the state pension plans are so underfunded, they began to raise the rates. They're raising them 1% per year, and they've been doing that for several years. But with the health pandemic, They delayed it for, they suspended it for the fiscal year 21, but they're going to add one more year in on the back end. So it's not like they're going to forgive it forever. They're just going to add it on the back end there. Want to briefly look at your capital assets. You have $65.6 million. They increased 15. Well, you would think that with all the construction going on. And so we list a lot of those additions. You had additions of $17.2 million. And a lot of that was streetscape, parking facilities. Remember the new golf course? That's another significant cost. Building improvements and stuff that came with the golf course. And then always you're buying vehicles and equipment. You're kind of going through a replenishment program there. But once we buy something, we begin to depreciate it over its estimated useful life. And so the depreciation expense was about 2.2. So when you take those additions minus the depreciation, that gives you that net change, the net increase up above of $15 million that you see there. Remember, as of June 30th, and I know we're right now in April, but you had about $18.5 million in projects ongoing. And I know some of those maybe are getting close to being finished, but I'm just saying there was a lot of projects, and we kind of list what those were as of June 30th. All right, let's briefly look at your long-term obligations. They were $29.9 million. They increased $1.5 million from the prior year. You made principal payments of $3.5 million. But remember, you issued that hospitality tax revenue bond to help fund the purchase of the golf course. And then remember, you entered into some leases for golf carts to help on the golf course as well, and then just all types for vehicles and equipment and so forth. The legal debt limit that the city has was about $12.1 million, of which you only had debt outstanding of about $500,000. So you had available about $11.6 million that you could, as council, if you chose to issue some GO bonds that you could do for various projects. Your debt service payments for the year that we're in right now are estimated to be about 4.7. So remember, it's like buying a home. If you buy a home, you got to pay your mortgage payment. Your mortgage payment for fiscal year 21 is about 4.7 million. All right, this year we implemented GASB 84. It kind of reshuffled some of the cards, but there's still 52 cards in the deck. They're just in different places in the deck, okay? So what ended up happening, some of the funds that were treated as agency funds, they moved into special revenue funds. But at the end of the day, the grand total really didn't change. It was a new a requirement because of GASB 84 and them wanting to make sure everybody was treating things similarly among governments. All right, again, just a reminder about COVID. We think we're at the tail end of that, but if additional variants or difficulties arise, that could have an impact. And that's why you want that fund balance to be able to hold you and cover you during the tough times. There's a new GASB down the road on leases that will kick in next year. They want to treat all leases like debt. So all leases, so if you rent a building for 5 years for $100,000 a year, they want you to set up an asset and a liability for it. They want you to treat it and show it on your balance sheet so everybody can see it. And then lastly here on compliance, we did not have any findings, significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. If we come across something, it's not only important that we talk to David about it and Andy about it, but it's important we let you know, because you can't fix something if you don't know it exists. But we did not have any of those issues. We did not have to do a single audit, which means if you spend more than $750,000 in federal money, we have to do another additional audit. Well, with all the COVID-19 grant monies, probably in the future, you're going to have a lot of those type of audits going forward. There were really nothing in the management letter other than that you implemented that new accounting standard. And lastly, again, you have an unmodified opinion. You really have good financial condition. And I'll just open the floor for any questions or comments.
Thank you, sir. I like the format. I thought that was interesting and appropriate, and appreciate y'all doing that for us. Questions? Council? Surely you have something for Mr. Phillips.
Just glad we got a good report.
You're doing good.
Well, we appreciate the report, sir, and I'm sure that council will take the time at some point to dig a little bit deeper on this, maybe a bit, and Mr. Merriman or Mr. Seifert would be glad to answer the questions for them. We appreciate y'all's work.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate the staff's work too, very much.
Speaking of Mr. Merriman, you're up next, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Three real quick things. First, we had our spring cleanup day on Saturday in a monsoon. And despite the monsoon, we had a pretty good turnout. We had about 155 total vehicles that showed up and dropped off items as various as tires, paint, e-waste, construction debris, even prescription drugs. So it was a fairly successful event given the adverse weather conditions. So my thanks to you for allowing that to take place, and of course for Public Services, Steve Grant and his team for their availability and willingness to brave the elements and provide an opportunity for our residents to drop off some stuff that ordinarily would not be dropped off. The second thing is Friday night we had our employee picnic that we do annually. It was very well attended. We had it right out here in City Park and of course in this hall. And from me to you, I want to thank you on behalf of the employees for your sponsorship and support of that. We do every year. It's very important to our employees and their families. And finally, just a reminder, and I'll remind you about this again at our next council meeting, May 18th, there's our budget workshop. You will have copies of the budget by the 11th, so be looking for that. And it will be right here in this hall. So I think we've got it scheduled to begin at 5 o'clock on the 11th. And with that, Mr. Mayor, unless there's any questions, that concludes my report. No, sir, the workshop's on the 18th. I will have a copy of the budget to you on the 11th. So you've got a week advance to memorize it, which I know you probably will, Mr. Bettis. And, yeah, and be prepared for discussion.
Mr. Bettis probably will. I want to thank you for the city picnic. That is always an enjoyable time, and to get families together, and had a good turnout for that the other night. And Mr. Dumas came close to winning the 1980s trivia contest, but blanked on the name of the original VJs from MTV. So.
Well, there were 5 of them.
Yeah, well, there were 5 of them. In your defense,
and our table didn't know any of the answers.
So we had a good time. We had a good time. Let's move to items of old business. Council? First before us this evening is the second and final reading of ordinance number 14-2021. This is an ordinance to annex a 10-foot strip of land that is part of a property located on McElrath Road. This comes at second reading. I know of no new or additional information in that regard.
No, sir, no new or additional information.
Comes to the second reading, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. Second and final reading of ordinance number 16-2021. This is an ordinance for the annexation of property owned by Bruce and Donna Davidson located at 1785 East Poinsett Street by 100% petition. Ms. Cotty joins us. Any new or additional information in that regard?
Yes, Mayor. The applicant contacted us today and asked if we would hold second reading until they have closed on the property.
Okay, thank you. Council, I will entertain a motion that ordinance number 16-2021 be held over until we are advised that it is ready to come back to council.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. You got
Who was the first?
Bettis, Mr. Bettis. questions in that regard? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert? Yes. Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, as you're aware, items 3 and 4 come to us together. We'll entertain those separately, the first of which is the second and final reading of ordinance number 18-2021. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of properties owned by Jones Kids Investments and Durham Kids Investments located at 1625 and 1627 Old Highway 14 by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification of S1 for said property. Any new or additional information in that regard, Ms. Cotty?
Yes, sir. Planning Commission held a public hearing on Monday, April 19th, and they recommended approval.
Council, ordinance number 18-2021 comes with approval of the Planning Commission. I'll entertain a motion to receive. Second. Motion and second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions or comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin?
No.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert? No. Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, we've got the second and final reading of ordinance number 19-2021. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of properties owned by AHOP 143 LLC and Timberlake Properties LLC located on Buncombe Road by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification for said property of S1. Ms. Cotty, new or additional information in that regard?
Yes, sir. Planning Commission also held a public hearing for this item on April 19th, and they did recommend approval of the S1 zoning.
Comes with a recommendation from Planning Commission. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Motion and second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin?
No.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert? No. Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council will move to, thank you, Ms. Cotty. Council will move to the items of new business, the first of which is seeking approval of grant application recommendations. Mr. Seifert joins us for that discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Contained in your package were minutes of the committee for the State Accommodations Tax Committee that is appointed by Council. We did meet on March 30th, and contained in your package, in addition to the minutes, are the recommendations coming from this council asking for your approval tonight. There were 4 applications received for requests ranging from $2,250 up to $20,000. We did have a little over $47,000 to award, so those are coming to you tonight for recommendations. We have a recommendation of $20,000 to South Carolina Charities Incorporated, $7,500 to Greer Cultural Arts Council, a recommendation of $4,500 to the Foothills Philharmonic, and a recommendation of $15,000 to the Greer Chamber of Commerce.
I think the first one was
South Carolina Charities?
South Carolina Charities.
Yes, sir. That's a BMW Pro-Am. Correct. The grant that we awarded last year was postponed, and it is about to take place in the next month or month and a half or something like that. Yeah, correct.
And did we provide funding for Family Fest last year?
This is the first year they've applied for a grant through ATAX. We do provide funding through our local hospitality tax. We've done historically for close to 20 years. Yes, sir. The $4,500 is their typical request. In prior years, we've not been able to fund to that level, but we had enough this year that the committee felt that they wanted to increase, and staff reached out to them, and they said they can certainly take the money.
They do a great job. They really do. Others? Questions or comments? Discussion on Mr. Seifert with us? Comes to us with the recommendation from the committee to have a motion to receive.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any additional conversation at this point? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Second item of new business, bid summary, site grading at 113 Leesburg Peak. Mr. Rue joins us for that discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you mentioned, this is for the site grading at our 113 Leesburg Peak property owned by the city. General scope of the project is to regrade the property to a 3-to-1 slope, cover the existing concrete waste with fill material, and then stabilize. We held a mandatory pre-bid meeting on March 29th, had a bid opening on April 7th, received 5 bids in total, and the apparent low bidder was Palmetto Group Contracting out of Gaffney, South Carolina. And after reviewing their references and previous work and projects they've done in the past, staff recommends awarding the bid to Palmetto Group Contracting at a price of $79,164.
With that recommendation, I'll entertain a motion to receive for the purpose of discussion.
So motion.
Second.
Motion second. Floor is open for discussion or questions.
Just let me ask one question. In this column where it says business license, yes and no, I noticed there's a couple of yes and a couple of no. I mean, is that pertaining to city business license or what?
I believe that's correct, yeah. So
License are they referring to?
to award the project and permit to them, they'll have to get a city business license.
Yeah, you would. I mean, they did.
I'm not sure on, I don't fill out that sheet, so maybe they just don't have one up to date at the moment, I'm not sure.
And again, what is the goal of this project?
The goal is to close out this dump site. We were under direction by DHEC to complete this, and this was the scope they gave us.
So after this, what is this?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Well, I'll answer the question. What it will be at the end is a remediated dump site. So what you've got is you've got a slope full of material that was inert, but DHEC found a non-compliant dump site. This was the recommendation and the order that we've been given by DHEC to comply. So what we'll have is a grassy slope that will still be a grassy slope.
Others?
That is now compliant.
A compliant grassy slope, yes, sir.
Compliant grassy slope.
Has there been a problem with other people dumping anything?
Mr. Bettis, to staff's knowledge, the answer to that is no. We went out and looked at it, and other than some material that is not concrete, I think there was some asphalt material, maybe even just some litter. But beyond that, no, sir, it's never been dumped on, to our knowledge, to any degree, other than what the city had done to dispose of some concrete.
Are they gonna make us monitor it?
No, sir, there's no monitoring requirements to this. It's just a matter of stabilizing the site to their satisfaction.
So they're not actually removing the concrete waste. They're just going to work with it in order to maybe fill it in with dirt and then just to change the slope of it to where it's.
That's correct, yeah. Regrade the concrete waste that's out there and then cover it with 2 feet of fill material and then grass it on top of that.
Others? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Item 3, First and final reading of resolution number 5-2021, a resolution to accept Brentwood subdivision streets, namely Grantito Drive, Blaze Court, Carmelo Court, Paxton Rose Drive, and Bosco Court into the city of Greer street system. Mr. Rue is already at the podium. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, I have Brentwood streets before you this evening. This project construction started in December of 2016. It's located off of Hammett Bridge Road in Council District 1. All utilities are in, streets are paved, and it's completely built out at 87 lots. Staff has inspected the construction and believe it meets city standards. Therefore, staff recommends Granito Drive, length of 1,937 feet, Blaze Court, length of 464 feet, Carmelo Court, length of 302 feet, Paxton Rose Drive, length of 946 feet, and Abacus Court, length of 100 feet, be accepted into the city street system for ownership and maintenance.
Comes with the staff recommendation. I'll entertain a motion to receive. Stand and a second. Floor is open for discussion or questions.
And it is my understanding that the city monitors regularly the streets as they're being constructed, as far as the construction and durability or quality, whatever you would call it.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Yeah, during construction, we require, before any street be paved with the binder surface of asphalt, we require compaction testing be reviewed and approved, and we require proof roll testing, and city staff be present for the proof roll.
Testing is done on each individual street at individual spots? Or?
So all utility and storm drain crosscuts and one test per 500 linear feet of roadway is what our land development regulations require. So that's received and reviewed and approved before we give the developer and their paving contractor approval to go ahead and pave the roads.
Others? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. First and final reading of resolution 6-2021, a resolution to accept Palmetto Valley subdivision streets, namely Palmetto Valley Drive, into the city of Greer street system. Mr. Rue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. So we have Palmetto Valley subdivision here. It's just one street, Palmetto Valley Drive. History of this site was, I think, plans were originally approved for this project back in 2003. I believe the original developer went bankrupt. The city purchased the property and then was subsequently resold to the developer who completed the project. Final plat was signed off in May of 2018. It's located off Bible Brook Drive in Council District 2. All utilities are in, streets are paved, completely built out at 22 total lots. Staff has recommended, has inspected the construction and believes it meets city standards, and therefore staff recommends Palmetto Valley Drive, length of 1,092 feet, be accepted into the city street system for ownership and maintenance.
This is Ozell, is it?
Formerly Ozello's Ridge, yes, sir.
A long time ago.
Mr. Griffin will finally be off the hook.
Do I remember that subdivision?
Based on the recommendation of staff, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions or comments in that regard? Good project. It, all's well that ends well on that one. So, good project. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. First reading of ordinance number 20-2021. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Freeman Farms Partners LLC located on Freeman Farm Road from C3 and I-1 to S1. Ms. Cotty joins us for that conversation.
Thank you. Yes, this is a rezoning request off Freeman Farm Road. This is kind of an aerial of the property. This is the current zoning map. As you can see, it is currently split zone C3 in the pink and then I1 in the bright blue. And they are requesting S1 services, which is also that lighter blue to the south. The future land use map calls for manufacturing and logistics. This is a street view of the site, and Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on April 19th, and they did recommend approval of the S1 zoning. I'm happy to answer any questions.
By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Okay, thank you. I'll entertain, based on the recommendation of staff and planning commission, I'll entertain a motion to receive. Have a motion to hear a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, the first reading of ordinance number 21-2020 is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Nelson and Reba Green, trustee, located at 851 Brockman McClyman Road, from RS Residential Suburban District to DRD, which is a design review. Ms. Cotty?
Sure, this is a rezoning request for DRD Design Review District. This is for up to 180 single-family detached homes in the Vines Creek section, and then 4 estate lots in Sylvan Woods. This is an aerial view of the site. It is located at the intersection of Brockman McClyman and Abner Creek Road. It also has frontage on Liberty Hill Road. The current zoning map is RS, Residential Suburban. And then the future land use map calls for traditional neighborhood, which is a more medium, kind of higher density residential. This is a current street view of this site. This is the site plan that goes along with the DRD ordinance. As you can see, they do have 2 entrances coming off of Brockman McClyman. And they do have an entrance off Abner Creek Road for the Sylvan Woods. Those are the 4 estate lots that you see kind of in that northeastern corner. And they do have an access off of Liberty Hill Road as well. In that main subdivision, as I said, it's up to 180 single-family homes, and then there are the 4 estate lots. They do have an extensive trail system throughout, and they do maintain trail connectivity from those 4 estate lots to the main neighborhood to allow access to the amenities. So they are coming in at about 3.19 units per acre. It does have 14 acres of common area. Very similar for most of our DRDs. It does maintain a 25-foot perimeter setback off of the property lines, and then a 20-foot setback along interior streets. In terms of materials, if they are going to use vinyl siding, it has to be that minimum of 0.46 millimeters. This is a higher quality vinyl siding. Hardy board, brick, or stone, and then we do require a minimum of 2 material combinations. Most of their infrastructure will be maintained by the HOA, and they will have to complete the traffic study before the FDP goes to Planning Commission. Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on April 19th, and they did recommend approval for the zoning, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Thank you. Council, based on the recommendation you've heard from staff and Planning Commission, I'll entertain a motion to receive. Have a motion to hear a second.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
And so the plans here are all within the condominiums, just basically single family,
Yes, ma'am. Single-family detached homes.
180 and then the 4.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about you said there were 14 acres of common space in this development. Are we gonna, we're doing that UDO process coming up, are we gonna start to kind of talk a little bit I know a lot of developers are proactively doing the trails and green spaces and parks and different things inside their developments, and especially in developments like these that are less connected from for instance, they just can't jump on the sidewalk and come down here and play in the park. So, I hope that when we do the UDO, we begin to kind of factor those things into the developments where there is some more green space and some more opportunities for recreation and different things like that built into the neighborhood. Because again, they just don't have the proximity that, the people inside the inner part of the city do.
Yes, open space, common area, developable open space, all of those kind of definitions that we've kind of discussed in the past, and a lot of the requirements that we have for cluster developments that we don't necessarily have in DRD, where all of those options are certainly on the table.
Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. First reading of ordinance 2221, 2021, an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Woods Farms LP located at 504 West Poinsett Street from R12 to C2. Ms. Cotty?
Sure. This is the property on Poinsett that Mr. Martin referenced in public forum. So this is an aerial of the site. Again, it is right off of West Poinsett. The current zoning map shows that it is currently R12, although it is bordered to the west by C2 and to the rear by OD, which is the office district. That's that purple color that you see. The property that will be utilizing the parking, the main property, is that 500 West Poinsett, which is on the corner. And the ordinance does allow remote parking to count for off-street parking requirements if it's within 400 feet of that use. This is the future land use map. We do call for traditional neighborhood in the future land use plan. Again, our traditional neighborhood in this newly adopted comprehensive plan does call for small scale retail mixed with some of that medium to higher density residential. This is a current street view of the site, and Planning Commission held a public hearing on April 19th, and they did recommend approval of the zoning. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Council, with that approval, I entertain a motion to receive. And a second. The floor is open for discussion.
So as I understood it, they're gonna have an entrance on the front, access off of Memorial Drive.
Yes, so DOT wanted to limit access. They won't allow left turns coming from, let me go back to the map, sorry. So they won't allow left-hand turns into the site. It'll be right only, coming past the business at 500, turning right, and then they'll exit to the rear. And then that property that's behind it at 102 has a parking lot that then exits onto Memorial Drive. And so they are granting them access to use that drive aisle.
So by show of hand, is the owner of the property a representative of the owner of the property with us? Okay, Mr. Martin, thank you. He did a brilliant job describing that, but I am completely confused. So, in the red is the insurance building and the HR block building. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Facing Memorial Drive.
It's
Yes.
a state farm now. It's on the.
I
Mr.
think,
Martin,
I was going to
would
say, I
you
think
join
it
us
just
for this
changed.
discussion, please, sir? So the red long narrow block is the H&R block and insurance building. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's on the corner of Memorial Drive and West Poinsett Street.
And the blue behind it is a residence right now with a driveway and a small detached garage or outbuilding of some kind.
If by blue you mean purple,
Purple.
then yes, it is actually office. It is a residential house, but it is used by a church for their administrative offices presently. They have 4 parking and spaces in the back and an entrance off of Memorial Drive. And these properties connect in a way that we'll be able to put an entrance on into the sliver of yellow surrounded by a red stripe there off of West Poinsett go straight through the property to the north into the purple, and then come out on through their driveway onto Memorial Drive.
Did the subject property not historically have a drive?
Residential cut. And so there is a cut there, but it's only a residential cut. The property was the home place of one of the owners of Wood Farm from way, way back. It's been in the family forever.
So the only way to enter this new additional parking area will be traveling west on West Poinsett Street. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You will turn in and there will be angled parking then?
Yes.
Behind this building?
Behind the State Farm.
Behind the
State
yes,
Farm building.
that is correct. It'll be angled parking and then going out through the purple
And
onto
it'll be
Memorial
one way
Drive.
out onto Memorial Drive.
That is correct.
And which property is that parking area to benefit?
So if you, looking at this picture in that block, the red block to the bottom right of our property, which is 500 West Poinsett. It's a 15 to 1,700 square foot brick property that has been renovated into commercial real estate offices, but due to the parking limitation, they are only currently able to use about 1,300 square feet of that building. And so doing this addition, they will be acquiring this property, building the parking lot. It's clearly is well within the 400 feet. They'll be able to use that parking to allow them to fully use their building at 500.
Are they just gonna walk down the sidewalk to get there?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Ms. Gotti, there, with the entrance off of West Poinsett, there really will be limited opportunity for screening of any kind for that parking area, will there?
Yeah, they'll still be required to put the roadway buffer in, that is to screen parking. So it will have to be, I believe it's about 15 feet. So there will be sidewalk and then screening and then the first parking spot right behind that building. I mean, we haven't seen a site plan. We haven't done construction plans. We've just seen a sketch, but yes, they'll certainly be subject to roadway buffer and the parking landscaping requirement.
And there will also be there's currently a fence on the back half of this property that separates it from the two residential lots that come out on Morris Street. The buyer intends to extend that fence further up to West Poinsett in order to separate between the single residential property there that is between 500 that's commercial and this property that would be commercial. So we fully intend to meet all the buffering and requirements.
Thank you, that's all the questions I had. Others? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We've got a motion and a second. The floor is open for discussion in that regard. Okay. Others? Questions? Comments? Any additional discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert? Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, first reading of ordinance number 23-2021. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Bruce and Donna Davidson located at 1685 East Poinsett Street, extension from C3 to I1. Ms. Gotti?
Sure, this is a rezoning request. Let's go ahead and turn it. So this large property is currently zoned as C3. This is related to the annexation request that you've previously heard that was held earlier in the evening for second reading. So their intent is to rezone this property, which is again the pink C3, and then combine it with the newly annexed parcel to the east to use for an asphalt plant. So again, this is the overview. It is on East Poinsett. The hatching that you see is GSP environs. So both properties, again, the annexed one and this current rezoning case are in the GSP environs. Current zoning, again, is C3. The blue that you see on either side is I-1 industrial. And this is located in mixed employment in the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. This is a current street view of the site, and the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing for this case, and they did recommend approval of the I-1 zoning district. I'm happy to answer any questions.
By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Thank you. Entertain a motion to receive. Floor is open for discussion. Questions?
Is this property tied? I think they had another piece of property we brought in at the last meeting. You're saying these two are connected?
Yeah, so just to the east, it's the longer piece. So their intent is to combine the two.
Making sure, not to have the same questions. I think we had the same conversation last week.
Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
No.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, item 9 is the first reading of ordinance number 24-2021. This is an ordinance to amend the City of Greer land development regulations by repealing and replacing in its entirety Article 2 of Section 1 Traffic Impact Study Analysis. Ms. Cotty.
Sure. So as I'm sure you are all very aware, the city has experienced record growth over the last decade and even beyond. And with exponential growth and increased population, the city has also experienced impacts to its roadway, both in condition and in traffic volumes. While we are in the midst of the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, updating our land development regulations and our zoning ordinance, staff really feels like this is a pressing issue that we need to at least take some progress to move forward to sooner rather than later, as we still kind of experience this growth over the next 18 months. So the city did retain consultant, infrastructure consulting and engineering, and Mr. Dillon is here tonight to answer any questions that you may have. And we are asking council to consider repealing the entire section and replacing it. One of the reasons we're asking for a full repeal and replace is that a lot of the text referred to standards that are in recognized manuals, which Mr. Dillon can go over. So most of the transportation engineers or users of this manual are familiar with those recommendations. So it was striking a lot of text and reorganizing and streamlining. So it made more sense to just do a full replacement. But key changes to highlight, again, we did streamline the text and go ahead and just reference manuals so we don't have to continually update as charts or things change. We are proposing a reduction of trips needed to trigger a transportation impact analysis. Current regulations are 100, and we are proposing to use 50. Staff did do a lot of research on other fast-growing areas in the state when we were kind of looking at what to do with ours. And one of note was Somerville, and they do have this same recommendation of the 50 trips to trigger a TIA. The scope of the TIA will be determined by the city engineer or the designee, and in this case, this could be a third-party consultant. One of the big changes, too, is making sure that we do have a third-party traffic engineer that we can refer out traffic engineering studies to, and then the cost of that review will be covered by the applicant. And then the city engineer, also another kind of change is the city engineer will have discretion to allow payment in lieu for certain improvements that may not be feasible to install. So that may be, whether a property next door has a huge grade drop off that it doesn't make sense to tie in, or right-of-way restrictions. And again, this won't be the go-to, but it will allow some discretion for our city engineer, as well as if we utilize on-call traffic engineers to help guide whether or not those improvements would go in. So I am happy to answer any questions. I will most likely defer any technical questions to Mr. Dillon. But again, kind of.
Mr. Dillon up there. Yeah, we need to know that we've got some expertise. I'm going to have to ask him if he's got any expertise in this field or not. Or by way of introduction, Mr. Dillon is the former district engineer for SCDOT for our area, and he has helped the city immensely in the past on a number of projects. I had him on speed dial for a number of years, and I valued his opinion and expertise. We get to continue to see each other regularly at the GPAS meeting, and so welcome again, my old friend. A long time no see, and thank you for helping us out on this. We certainly had a good introduction from Ms. Gotti, but you want to add anything to that, sir?
Mayor, thank you, and council. Thank you all for hearing on this ordinance review. Basically, you hit all the main points. Is the reduction from 100 to 50 trips, and that's not unusual in a CBD like this, the central business district with a lot of traffic and tight land lots, where we try to avoid, like, a lot of developers will tend to get under the 100 trips, 90, 95 trips. There are mechanisms to do that based on square footage of buildings, and I think this will help kind of get a full handle on what the impact's going to be in the city of Greer. The third party, that's assisting the city with the expertise, like you mentioned, of looking at these TIAs that can get very cumbersome. I've been on both sides reviewing them for 25 years to the other side of doing them for 5 years. So you kind of see the ins and outs and mechanisms you can manipulate the TIA to kind of do what you want and be able to see through that and come up with ultimately a good study that's going to show what the needs are on the impacts to the road system. And ultimately that's what a TIA does, is showing the needs of what's going to happen to the road system, good or bad, and then coming up with some recommendations that might offset those bad points on the road. And that's it, Mayor. Any questions?
So let me ask, and just to set the stage for our discussion, and either one of you all will be glad to jump in on this. Mr. Dillon pointed out that oftentimes there needs to be interpretation of a traffic analysis study, and in a lot of cases, sometimes that may be partially opinion and partially fact, and it takes some expertise in that regard. And I've always taken the TIA with a grain of salt for that reason, and partly because in a situation like the city of Greer and Somerville and others, it's often kind of a chicken and an egg sort of thing. There's always this question about, well, the road can't handle any more traffic, but the road doesn't change until there's more traffic. And so for me, there's always, I guess, some doubt in my mind as to accuracy and solution and how we go about that. I heard Ms. Cotty say that it was, as the UDO does in a lot of cases, offer some discretion, but could I hear more about how that discretion would be applied and where it would be applicable?
Yes, Mayor. Yes, Mayor. Going back to the accuracy of a study, all engineers that perform these studies, there's a systematic way of doing that. You got to get actual physical counts on the roadway. You got to grow that traffic to the build year, and based on this ordinance and most the state and city and county ordinances, it's a build plus 1 year. So you grow that traffic based on a growth rate, where you get the growth rates. Usually SCDOT's got a good ADT website that gets roads around a CBD, in through CBD, to determine how traffic is growing over the past 10 years. So an engineer will get that growth rate, apply it to the existing counts, to that build year. So you got a no build model, and then you do trip generation. And IT is a good format to go to as far as it's recognized nationally, as far as producing trips. And they'll give factors in there of, hey, this is a good formula to use, or it's not. You need to go get your own counts to a similar type situation. And you apply those trips, and of course, where you get into a subjective type is how you distribute those trips, where the percentages are coming, going to and from. And that's where the expertise comes in, reviewing these things. It just makes sense of this traffic coming from here to there. You've got the facts, you've got the volume on the roadway, you got what pretty close to what this business is going to put out on the roadway. Now where they're to and from and how it's going to be applied to the roadway, and what are the causes and effects of that. So it's pretty systematic, and then going in and looking at that data is, number one, making sure that data is correct. There's a lot of mechanisms. You got the growth rate, the trip distribution, the build and no build models. There's all this, and they usually run synchro programs if it's signalized intersections or unsignalized intersections. It can be as simple as looking at the driveway. Does it need turn lanes on the main road? It's a two-lane roadway, driveway coming in. Does it need a left turn lane or does it not? Well, there's charts and graphs based on those volumes. You apply that, and it's either yay or nay. I mean, it's as plain as that. And but going into the mitigation, what you're getting at is do we mitigate, do we not? That becomes an experience call. Number one, using engineering fact. Number two, using common sense and applying that to that situation. Every situation is unique. There's not one same situation that's going to play out another time. So it depends on right of way. It depends on cuts and fills alongside the roadway as far as improvements. Prime example, we need a turn lane at a driveway. In order to get that turn lane, you got to widen the road roughly 250 foot on each side of that driveway. Well, the property frontage is only 50 foot. Is there right of way to do that widening? Or are they going to go to adjoining property owners and get that property? Probably not. They're not going to have the power of combination to go get that property. The city's not going to provide that right. The right of way is not there, and especially if the homeowner finds out you need this to make your business work, I'm going to sell whatever, you pay whatever price I want on that property. So it's a judgment call, and that's where we get to the fee in lieu of possibly saying, well, here's what a turn lane is going to cost. It's needed, but we can't do it. Let's apply that somewhere else. So, and that is a right or wrong. I mean, that's facts. There's no opinion whether that turn lane is needed or not. There is factual cases that you can go through based on the data.
Okay, so purely hypothetical.
Yes.
There's a building on East Poinsett Street right up here that is a beauty shop and generates 50 trips a day. And there's one right here on Cannon Street, and they're only 150 feet apart. It generates 50 trips a day. Well, our staff have the discretion to say, okay, maybe the one on Cannon Street doesn't need to do one because there's actually very little traffic there. There's other ways to get out, but maybe this one has to. I mean, is that the kind of discretion that we're talking about?
That, and a lot of times it gets the chicken before the egg. You were here first, you generated that need for that. The next person, of course, over time, that traffic's going to grow on the roadway that's going to cause that need. And lo and behold, you come along, I put my driveway in, I got to put this turn lane in based on that data. Is what's going to happen.
And one thing that we talked about too a lot when we were going through this, and again, this was also reviewed by Robert Rue and Steve Grant, the assistant and the city engineer, had a heavy hand in this as well. But part of that discretion lies in determining the scope. And so what Mr. Dillon was explaining was, you know, if it's 50 trips, maybe it just is the driveway entrance. But if it's 95 trips, then the scope may be, the next intersection down. And so that's going to depend on the exact number of trips, where it's located, what the uses around it are. What am I forgetting?
That's it.
You're the expert.
It's going to depend on, like, what is happening there. How bad is the roadway operating now? Local people are going to know, the city knows what kind of condition, what type of complaints they get out there on the road system. How bad is that operating now? I'm going to add trips to that. So do I want to make them go down and study this intersection? We're already getting complaints at wanting a multi-way stop control or a traffic signal. And I'm going to add another 75 trips to that. Yeah, we need to look at that and see what that actually does with the complaints we're already getting on that. So that combines the knowledge of the area, what's going on, plus the data.
And again, I'm not the expert, but I mean, DOT has helped us before too in helping define the scope of which intersection should be included in the study, and I think those are pretty accepted type standards.
Correct.
Based on number of trips and the types of uses.
Correct.
Correct.
Correct. And normally, and a part of this ordinance review is the designee or the city engineer will consult with DOT on the impacts or the county system of what their impacts are, which you're playing with Spartanburg and Greenville County here. So you would need to have close contact with those folks. Even though it might come out on a city street, there's a big intersection down here that's going to incorporate the city and the city, state, and county. So let's talk, and that's part of this ordinance review.
Others have monopolized the first part of this conversation. Others?
What about, is there a way for somebody to manipulate the fee in lieu of?
I mean, some of it will be subjective, but we would do most of how we review bonds right now. So it would be a certified engineer's estimate. So I mean, they are stamping it and putting their seal on it. Most likely it would be kind of construction costs, but in some cases it may involve right away or it may involve design depending on how involved the improvement is. But again, we would have our third-party traffic engineer. This would allow us discretion to have them review it at the expense of the applicant as well. So if we had concerns that it didn't seem like enough, we could certainly then refer it out if we need it at their expense. So, and you can certainly weigh in too, because you would see an estimate.
Yeah, I mean, you can manipulate anything, but it's tight review schedule on what's going on, what the data that they're presenting, the facts. I'll say like a construction estimate. Have they covered everything in that estimate? I mean, oh, you forgot this, you left this off. Yeah, there needs to be a good review on that estimate to make sure it's legit.
Okay. So this doesn't get triggered until you have a development plan? Just for annexation, this doesn't?
Well, it would depend. For annexation or rezoning, if there was a plan in place that they knew coming in, we would go ahead and request that study sooner than we have in the past. But it wouldn't, again, they'd have to do it either now or later.
You'd have to have a development plan in order to figure the number of trips.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a straight rezoning where a property is like, oh, I want this to be commercial to be more marketable, but they don't have a plan, we wouldn't require that TIA at that time. We would require it when they actually came in to pack with a commercial site plan, that they had actual square footage and a proposed use.
All right. Say I bring you my development plan, and you calculate that there's going to be 60 trips. All right. If I disagree, do we negotiate? Am I held my feet to the fire to do the study, or is there legal recourse? How do you settle it?
I mean, I think so. I can't remember the exact standards, but it's Big Green Book has the trip generation.
Yeah, the IT trip generation, there's a manual that sets forth that's accepted. Say anywhere from all kinds of retail. I mean, it's even got breweries and wineries in there.
Okay, so we got a reference to figure exactly, more or less, how many trips it's going to be. So at that point, I have to do a TIA.
Yes, but there is discretion on the scope again. So it may just be the entrance to the thing, which would.
Who Who decides that scope?
So that would be the city engineer, or they could, Mr. Grant we could then consult this third-party traffic engineer, again, at the expense of the applicant, to help determine that scope.
So what's the ultimate arbitrator that the developer has if you get on down the line and he still says you're wrong?
Sure. Our existing code has an appeals process, and that does go to Planning Commission for appeals, and that would be retained in this new ordinance. So I didn't highlight that because it wasn't a change, but it's certainly.
Is that the end of the line, the Planning Commission?
Yes, sir.
So if they turn it down, he can't come to council, he or she?
No, I believe it would go to municipal court at that point, but I'm not 100% certain on that. I'd have to look into that. But if you would like it to go to council, that's certainly an amendment that we could make. So.
I'm not sure that I want the Planning Commission making the final decision.
This is first reading.
It's first reading. Again, Mr. Bettis, I think that's perfectly fine. We can, we'll entertain either a motion tonight, or we can bring you back an alternative at the by second reading.
I think it'd be appropriate that if there are other issues or questions that those go to staff before we get to adding things at this point, since we've developed it this far. Let's do that as a.
Well, the zoning and appeals decision, if you get turned down, you can come to council. Then it goes to legal if council turns it down.
I don't have a problem with that. I think that would be an amendment we would make at the final reading of the second reading after we've had some discussion with staff and see where that fits in, so that we could get some feedback from them on that as well too.
So I'm sorry, I just got one more question. Have you determined how much of a delay this process will put on the project?
I don't know that it would delay much. I mean, most developments are already completing them. They may have to complete it earlier in the process. And I don't know, maybe you would know, typically they can get it completed in 3 to 4 weeks, and then review would be.
Right. A typical traffic, a TIA is going to be based on the counts, how early they can get somebody out there to count. Then we run into a whole new factor when school's out, and do we grow by school kind of populations, or are there some old counts they can get? That's the one critical thing on a TIA, is getting around that school season.
I'm not opposed to traffic studies. I think we should do more of them. I just don't want it. I just want it to be an undue burden. Are there other municipalities using this thing?
Right now, I'm basically on call with Lancaster County. The entire county farms out their TIA review, and I think they're less than 100 trips. I'll have to go back and double check. But like she said, Somerville's, I think, at 50 peak hour trips. I want to say Berkeley County might be at 50 peak hour trips, where growth is exploding. They tend to narrow those peak hour trips down that requires a study. And again, what you were saying is getting back to a study might be as simple as saying, let's just look at your driveway analysis. Make sure it doesn't need a turn lane. Make sure you'll be able to handle the traffic in and out of here safely onto the roadway. And I don't think that a developer's really going to argue that, as opposed to coming in and appealing the mitigation requirements based on the study.
Does this study, once it's complete, will it say in some form, okay, this road here is not capable of handling this? It's not because of all the traffic, it's because of the condition of the road. Does that have anything to do with it?
The study normally doesn't look at design factors as far as you got tractor trailers using 11-foot wide lanes. They'll mention that in there. They'll go over the basic of what's happening on the roadways. Sometimes they'll get into the width of the roadway and say, yeah, tractor trailer usage, it's under pavement structure is not enough there. They can come in and say that, but that's not really a forte of a traffic engineer. They're to look at the data on the volumes.
Numbers.
Yes, sir. That's where I think The
Yeah,
planning would come in and say, no, you're not going to put tractor trailers on a 10-foot wide roadway.
Yeah, and I will say, so we first were going to bring two different sections of the LDR. One of them is road classifications and road kind of standards and specs. They needed a little more time to work on that, so we decided to split them up. But one thing that we are considering, and I mean, staff is proponent for, is currently our LDR only requires the road standard widths and standard conditions, pavement depth. I'm out of my depth here. I'm looking at Steve Grant. But it only applies to new roads. So like if there were a new subdivision, it would apply to the road coming in and then all of those internal subdivisions. But one of the changes that we plan to make is to make sure we include existing roads, so that road frontage. So we will be able to require widening and or pavement condition upgrades if it does not meet those standards. So you will be seeing that change in the next month or two, but it will come in a different section of the LDR.
Require improvements of whom?
The applicant, the developer.
Public road?
Potentially. So if they're going to be utilizing, it would only be for their frontage. So, but it would be required of them to bring it up to standard.
It's not dissimilar, Mr. Bettis, to even the way this traffic impact analysis is. The developer is required to mitigate their impact. Even if the road is already failing or at a D, they can't be expected to bring the road up to an A, but they can mitigate the impact that they're making on that road. So that's kind of the holistic approach to the traffic impact analysis study. To this further point is if the road itself is failing, they need to make the necessary repairs on that they're furthering the decay. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get at this second portion of it.
That's good. I'd like to know somewhere that's doing that.
There's limits. Yes, sir. We can provide other jurisdictions that are requiring it, but there's limits to what can be required, I think, reasonably. But it doesn't excuse the fact that I think these developers they bear some responsibility on impact of existing infrastructure.
I did. There's a piece in here about the verification of peak hours, and it talked about the year growth horizon, and then talked about the build year plus 1 year for final analysis. I'm just curious if it goes out for a year, I wonder if they're factoring in, because we are growing so rapidly, and there's a subdivision here and a different type of development there, and I think the challenge with that is that you can do a study on the impact of the traffic in that moment, but you can't anticipate what's going to come with the other developments that are stacking on top of each other. And so when you put all of those in place, now you've got a serious problem that you didn't anticipate on the front end.
Good question. That is where you get into a TIA, and it's really up to the governmental agency to provide the data, saying, all right, I got 250 unit apartments built over here, just been built, I got a TIA on it. Traffic hadn't started, they just started selling the units. I got a builder ready to build another 250 right here. Well, the staff would have that impact study. They got to give it to the next engineer to say, you incorporate this study data, this traffic, into your background traffic. So they will have to pull that traffic into theirs. It's what they call background traffic. That is normal practice in a TIA.
Yeah, so if there's something approved, we can certainly have them take it into account. You're right, if there's just empty C2 or C3 land, we don't. But if it has an approved development that's approved but not quite built yet, that doesn't have that traffic on the road, they would take that into account for background.
I think the greatest challenge with this whole thing is, I talked to Mr. Ponder for a while the other day, and his struggles with the rezoning of that industrial property where S1, where so much of the transportation focus is in that area of logistics, and that there are so many heavier loads and more loads on those roads, and it's almost because you have the counties and the state and then the city, kind of all of us overlap, and it's it's almost like it's such a reactive approach. You get so many of the heavier loads that damage the roads, and then it's like, well, what do we do? It's not necessarily built to the standard, for that type of capacity. It's just it's a mess.
It's a good question, and I've heard both sides of it. I heard the truckers, I pay gasoline tax, I fund that road, it's a public road, I can use it, so I've heard both sides.
It's chicken and the egg. I mean, we go to these GPATS meetings and they're planning on widening roads, but the time frame we're talking about is 30 years, 35 years at this point. So, I mean, that's what we're planning for, we've got a dire need today, and it's on the list, but it's on page 13 of the list, so it's always tough. One more question, and it's been years since I took that course on planning and zoning, Ms. Gotti, but it sticks in my mind for some reason that a planning and zoning issue can't be decided solely on road condition and or traffic. Is that correct in some sense, or am I just remembering a part of that, or what?
I am not certain. I know we do have, I believe like rezonings and things can't, but we do have in our DRD ordinance that it can be taken into account. But I'll have to look into that and potentially even consult our city attorney on that one.
That's what we've assumed for a long time, is that we can't really use traffic to deny.
Yeah, well, and I mean, transportation is an element of the comprehensive plan, and being compatible or compliant with the comprehensive plan, it is an element. So I don't know that you can solely do it, but it's certainly something you can take into account.
Okay.
So, but I will
Fair enough.
consult the city attorney on that one.
Okay. Well, as you know, far and wide, that's the biggest complaint for new development.
Yes, that's why we wanted to move forward and try and make some progress towards incremental change and not wait for the full UDO. But again, as we're developing it and we see it in action, we can certainly make amendments or make changes for the UDO as well, if this were to pass.
Okay. Others? Mr. Dillon, thank you for joining us this evening. Appreciate your information. Ms. Duncan, where do we stand on this?
You need a motion.
Thank you.
So we talked about
Right.
Well, at least for us to vote. I'll need a motion to proceed.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions in regards to first reading of ordinance number 24-2021? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we have no items in executive session this evening. Stand adjourned.